Amanda. 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 Now, that is Comrade Pravin Gordhan, who is my boss. Amanda. Viva ANC, viva. This ANC is still our ANC. Viva the Alliance, viva. Assalamu alaikum, Sanbonani, Namaste, Vanakkam, Dumelang, Shalom. Let me acknowledge Barbara Hogan and the Kathrada family and convey my condolences and the condolences of my family as well, the leadership of the Kathrada and Mandela Foundation, and leaders of the ANC and Alliance, my former colleagues, ministers and deputy ministers, leading activists from the NGOs who've played a marvelous role, particularly over the last year or so, and fellow patriots. One of the things that used to happen regularly in the few occasions that I used to knock into Kathy at one meeting or the other, and without fail, he would say, "Here's the tax man. I've paid all my taxes." And I hope all of you do as well. So whoever is the finance minister, they still require your taxes. I said to Barbara as I was walking past that I'm going to expose a little bit about her and my first meetings with her around 1980, 1981. And at that time, we were meeting in the household or house of the Coleman family and discussing how an insurrection can take place in South Africa and what would be required to bring together people to defeat the apartheid enemy. And a few months later, a group of activists in Joburg were detained, and in her case, went to prison for 10 years. And another group of activists in Durban were also detained and released some 6 months later. But there were activists throughout the country who were similarly detained and jailed at some stage or the other. So in Barbara, you have a lifelong revolutionary, pretty much like Comrade Kathy. And you can see the fire with which she speaks when she addresses us here. And it's a spirit that will continue, I'm sure, to inspire all of us as we go forward. Comrade Kathy leaves behind, no, yes, please clap for her. We have to regrettably say that Comrade Kathy leaves us at a time when the ANC, our democratic government, and indeed our society finds itself in a mini crisis. At the same time, he leaves us at a time when we can't say we're confused about what the problems are. He leaves us at a time when the problems are very clear. And who is the problem and what is the problem is very clear as well. Don't read too much into the who part of it. He also leaves us at a time, and this is something that we need to talk about in every household, in every workplace, in every university, in every village. And that is, how do we connect all the dots of the events that are going on around us? Because that is going to help us to understand what is the nature of the crisis that we face. Connect the dots. Remember those words. Because looking at each dot on its own won't help us. Draw the line between the dots. Who is doing what? What are they doing it for? All the previous speakers have brought that to your attention. And who benefits as a result of the things that are actually happening? But he also leaves us at a time, fellow patriots, where it's very clear that we need to act and act together if we are to do something about the dots that we are connecting. He also leaves us at a time when many of the solutions that we require to set this country back on its democratic, non-racial and non-sexist path, where people shall govern, that solution is also clear. As a former member of the government, one day old, let me say fairly publicly and openly that I think postponing, inverted commas, the official memorial was petty and spiteful. Nothing should get in the way of celebrating the lives and contribution and the lessons of what many people at this platform have called the golden generation. Nothing should stop it. So, comrades and friends, Kathy's life as an activist, as a Democrat, as a humanitarian, must enable us not only to celebrate that life and remember the values that he promoted and lived, but more importantly, given that we find ourselves in what I'm still calling a mini-crisis, hopefully it doesn't grow beyond that, but in this mini-crisis, we must actually ask ourselves, what will Kathy the activist do? What will he, if he were the commander-in-chief of an army of democratic activists, wearing different colored T-shirts? The color of the T-shirt doesn't matter, as long as you are a Democrat. The first thing he will say is ask yourself, what's really the truth of all the events that are going around us? What's really going on? Don't accept the superficial nonsense that we hear. Above all, don't accept the fake news. And even the fake channels, by the way, you know the one I'm talking about. How they get away in a democratic South Africa with a broadcasting commission and a broadcasting law is unbelievable. I know many of you, if not all of you, are subscribers to something. But that something needs to be asked. What is this propaganda channel, which is akin to Nazi Googleism? What is this Google tradition? You all know Google, by the way, or Goebbels. Let me test you. How many of you know Goebbels or heard of him? It's too few of you. He was Hitler's propaganda chief. That's the propaganda that constantly attacks any one of you that will stand up and say something's wrong in this country. That is the channel, and those who are masterminds behind it. There's one word starts with a B and another one starts with a P. You'll work that one out. Because where does this sophistication come from? That's the kind of question Kathy will ask you to answer, so that we understand where the truth lies. He will also say to all of us, don't go home now and say, what a lovely meeting we had at City Hall. How inspiring it was, and then go back to some normality. He will say to each one of you, What in your own ordinary life, in a small and humble way, can you promote or do in order to bring about better change and a greater and more resilient democracy? Ask yourself that question. And through that active participation, particularly to activists of the Alliance and in the Alliance, he will say it is time to unite and fight the weaknesses in our movement and do everything possible to make sure that the Mandela, Sisulu, Tambo, Kathrada values are reinstilled in our movement. So that's what we practice every day. He will ask us to constantly watch what we as government, well, used to be, do every day. What do the 1.3 million civil servants do every day? What do the 350,000 people who work in municipalities and get paid with your money, what do they do every day? Is their entire focus and energy and resources committed to ensuring that the poor, the working class, and the middle class in particular are the beneficiaries of the money that is spent? Or is it going into some bank account somewhere? He will say to you, as Bonang said earlier on, that the state-owned companies are our companies. They belong to South Africans, not to the CEO, not to the board, not to the government. And he will say, where are all these billions of rands going? In terms of procurement or contracts or tendering, call it whatever you will. Are those managers really accountable to you? How is it that a structure get out of our way? We still want to continue with this Denel Asia venture with a company called VR Laser. And notwithstanding all the things that are in the public domain, you can go to hell. You must get out of our way. Now, that's the relationship between state capture and getting away with things. So if you want to understand what state capture means, that's what it means. So our first challenge, comrades and ladies and gentlemen, is that we need to get this organization of ours into a shape that will ensure that we truly have a people's movement committed to the mission that was defined in 1912 and beautifully articulated in the Freedom Charter. But secondly, this movement is the movement that governs this country. And when three senior officials, the Deputy President, the Secretary General, and the Treasury General, all say within 24 hours of each other, we don't know where these decisions are made, then there's something to worry about. And just in case somebody wants to report us to some disciplinary committee or whatever, at the next NEC meeting, we will say it in the meeting as well. The next challenge Kathy will ask us to look at is what is this animal called state capture? And what does it actually mean for ordinary people? Why should you be afraid of this animal? Because you can disregard it. Most of it goes over our heads anyway. We should be afraid because when you spend almost R1 trillion on infrastructure each year, if not more, in South Africa, then we have to ask the question, is that R1 trillion being spent in a way in which our economy is more efficient, our logistics is more effective, and above all, our cities are now becoming more dense and closer and overcoming the apartheid legacy, and that ordinary people are going to have lower transport costs, shorter distances to travel, and have a more productive and decent life than they've had before. Those are the questions we need to ask. Where's the trillion rands being spent? And where some of us ask this question, we get into trouble for that. Secondly, Kathy will ask us to look at whether that same state resource, we spend 1.4 trillion rands as a government on average in the next 2 to 3 years. Where is that being spent? How much is being extracted for the benefit of small groups of people? Why is it that 95% of the people's wealth is owned in equivalence terms by only 10% of South Africans? Is that kind of inequality sustainable inequality? He didn't sacrifice his life so that we can have that kind of inequality in our society between the top 10% and the rest of the 90%. Something needs to be done about that. Is our money being spent effectively, as previous speakers said as well, to create the jobs that are required in the society in partnership with both social enterprises and the private sector as well? We're stuck in that regard. The state-owned companies, on the one hand, we talk about the mission, Minister Manuel, former Minister Manuel, at least I can call somebody else former. In the National Development Plan, we talk about a capable and developmental state. Right? But are these state-owned companies contributing to a capable and developmental state? Is the question every day, whilst you're relaxing in your lounges, you should actually ask. Why did the grants tender go wrong? Comrade Barbara referred to this earlier on. Why aren't we listening to what the highest court in this country asks us to do some 3 years ago? That is when suddenly many of us become gymnasts. We engage in blame shifting. Let's see if we can include the Treasury somewhere. So if something does go wrong, we blame the Treasury for it. That's the recent phenomenon that's been taking place. Instead of being adult and saying, I didn't do what I was supposed to do, and in fact, if you were really adult, you will say, I was doing some favors for some people. But it's also time, ladies and gentlemen and fellow patriots, for the private sector in South Africa to come to the party increasingly, pretty much as they did over the last 15 months. And you must congratulate the leaders of the CEO movement. They have played a fantastic role. I also want you to applaud the leaders of our trade union federations, the 3 federations, who a year ago, when we were called back, they were going to join us as well, who went out to meet investors and ratings agencies and so on, and saying South Africa is a good place to invest in. South Africa is a reliable debtor. We will pay our debt. And you can lend us more money when we actually require it. That's what the so-called roadshow was about. It wasn't, and I'll come back to this point in a moment, about meeting secretly with somebody in terms of the so-called intelligence report. It was a very unintelligent intelligence report. The one thing Kathy will ask us to watch out for is that state capture mustn't become economic sabotage. In other words, you become so greedy, chase money to such an extent, think about only yourself and whoever else is in your company entirely or solely, and forget about the 55 million people. And in the process, say, you see the economy is only growing at 1%. Whereas the resources that are available should in fact be used for the benefit of this economy growing, creating jobs, giving us more revenue, so that decent living conditions can be created for all of our people. So there are certain industries that are being targeted at the moment. And if that particular sector of our economy, which has a long history, so it's a quiz contest for you now. If that sector is being managed in the way it is being managed currently, and we don't do something about stopping the mismanagement, then we're going to lose tens of thousands of jobs. We're going to lose tens of billions of investment. And we're going to lose the opportunity for large numbers of people to actually benefit from those sorts of investments. So watch out, South Africa, that we don't reduce ourselves to economic sabotage, which can have long-term consequences and take us another 5 or 10 years to actually recover from. Kathy, I'm sure at some stage would have told Barbara, I'm observing certain things that seem to be suggestive of a streak of authoritarianism creeping into our system. And we are a vibrant society that has a long history of mass mobilization and mass organization. This channel last night was actually saying, I'm now encouraging mass mobilization. Yes, I'm unashamedly encouraging mass mobilization. And there are many of my comrades in the NEC and in government who will say the same if they had a chance here. But we're not doing it for its own sake. We're doing it because we do believe, as previous speakers have said, that the people shall govern. And you can't govern if you just remain in your comfortable lounge, wherever it might be. You've got to come out, become organized, become part of something. You can't have democratic accountability of us. All the ministers that are here will agree with me. You must hold us accountable. You must call us more frequently to meetings like this and say, in your portfolio, why did you do this? Explain this to me. Where are you going? How is it going to benefit ordinary South Africans? That's accountability. Parliament is not the only instrument in a democratic society governed by a democratic constitution where accountability takes place. It takes place everywhere in the country. So just maybe three last points. The first is, what is a roadshow? You see, the most experienced minister is here. Maybe I should call him to explain. We do 2 of these so-called road shows usually every year. After the budget in February and after the medium-term budget policy statement, late October, early November. The purpose of a road show is to meet people who've got 2 trillion rands worth of their money lent to the South African government. And they want to know, how is your economy growing? How are you going to grow faster? How are you going to overcome inequality in your society? Where is this new growth going to actually come from? What's this latest protest about? Do you have political stability in your country? Are you going to ensure that what you tell us is what you're going to do? Can we believe you? And we start usually 7 in the morning and finish late at night. On Monday, when we landed at Heathrow Airport, the Director General and myself, we get this SMS which says, come back. So that's fine. But we then decided that the flights are in the evening, so we'll change our flights and we'll take that flight the same evening. And met 2 ratings agencies in the morning. Then met about 50-odd investors who have amongst them $5 trillion to invest. And before we left, we had a teleconference with a 3rd rating agency because that appointment was for the following day and we couldn't keep that appointment. That's all we were doing. Now there's this wonderful intelligence report. which says, I don't know if the Deputy Minister is really here. Is he here? What we were doing, oh, that's another story. The Deputy Minister was in South Africa. He wasn't with me. But he was asked to come back. So that's telling the truth that Kathy would have asked us to say. Okay? So my time is up, I'm told, but I have to tell you a few things still. So this intelligence report says we went out to meet certain people in order to sabotage our economy. Now, why on earth will be activists and bureaucrats who've given 20 years, in the case of the bureaucrats, activists for much longer periods, I'm going to tell you my age right now, who have committed themselves to democracy and are trying to do their best to, as Comrade Solly said, contribute to good governance in our own humble way. Why would they want to go out there to sabotage this economy so that all of your pension investments and other things are going to be affected? So those are lies. That's not even fake news. The second thing was that I made a phone call. A journalist tells me this yesterday. And my phone is tapped. I made a phone call to a certain person. I later on get the name. Some of you know him, Lord Rennick, who works for a particular international bank, who's organized many meetings for South African ministers and bureaucrats with mining and other investors over the years. So I'm now supposed to be conspiring with Lord Rennick in an anti-South African agenda. That's the second lie. The third is that either the Director General or myself or both of us said nuclear is out for South Africa. Now, we all have different views on that. But at the lunchtime session or event, there was one lady who asked a question, where are you going with nuclear? And we have a standard answer. And the standard answer is that nuclear is part of the energy mix described in the Integrated Resource Plan, number one. Number two, the Department of Energy has indicated the path we're going at the moment. Number three, the President, myself, and others have said very clearly that we will do nuclear on the basis of what we can afford at each stage over the next 10 or 20 years, or whenever, and however long it takes. But there's this, tweet that's moving around. And there's a gentleman, Russian gentleman with a C as his first initial of his surname, who allegedly was in this, somewhere there, who heard somehow that nuclear is off the table completely, phoned somebody very important in South Africa, and that's why we got called back. That's also a lie. So let me conclude, because I think it's important that you should know the facts from us directly, and you can communicate it to as many people as you can. I want to conclude by saying that this event should remind us of the long history of mass mobilization and mass involvement in our country. It should remind us that throughout our history, activists like Kathy and his generation and many generations before and after have fought against greed, they've fought against selfishness, they've asked us to be honest servants, to engage in as much public service as we can and promote the interests of the country ahead of the interests of any small group or set of individuals. And all one can do is to say that even in the modern era of populism as it is sweeping through Europe and other parts of the world, don't believe false populism. Let's go back to our democratic tradition, strengthen the state, strengthen the ANC, strengthen mass formations of our people wherever we actually find them, and make sure that we control our democratic path. And thank you very much for this opportunity to speak here.
Amandla.